Hi, I'm Helen Walton. I'm Chief Commercial Officer and one of the founders at eGaming. We deliver a variety of games to the iGaming industry, and at the moment we're working on multiplayer slots.
Hi, my name's Kevin Dale. I'm CEO of eGamingMonitor.com. I've been 20 years in the industry, marketing director at the likes of Betfair and Sporting Bet, and CEO at Game Accounts, GAM PLC. And eGaming Monitor, we monitor games, 30,000 games across 1,200 operators from 1,200 suppliers. Big is beautiful, I think, is the brief summary of an answer to that one. Recent consolidation, recent acquisitions, even this last couple of weeks we've got. So in terms of acquisitions and so on, what we look at from a supply and operator perspective, we look at operators obviously, but then we also track operators buying suppliers and suppliers buying suppliers. You obviously had sort of the big sort of NetEnt, Red Tiger, big time gaming type stuff earlier this year. What we've got now on the supplier side is Psy Games with Authentic Gaming, and then Elk Studios. I noticed it's fairly momentous from a supply perspective. You've got
Side Play on the lottery side they bought recently.
Exactly, that too. You've got operators to suppliers, so there's a sort of a crossover there, I suppose the answer is a little bit different depending on what sort of acquisition is happening. So if you've got an operator acquiring a supplier, so DraftKings and SB Tech, or Aspire taking over Pariplay and BetaBet, different challenges again for those incumbents who are the suppliers to the operators in question, for example. You've then got affiliates to affiliates, obviously, operators to affiliates, and so on and so forth. So it's a complex picture, but big is beautiful, generally speaking, just because market access as much as anything.
Market access and margin squeeze. Whenever, the operator acquisition spree of a couple of years ago, I know it's continuing, but as soon as it took off, it was obvious that suppliers were going to have to match it. If they're squeezed on margin, one of the most obvious, most well-known reactions to that is to scale, and to search for economies of scale and to search for the power that size can give you to push back against margin squeeze or to increase it. And so I think, we're seeing that all over the place. But with scale, there are some downsides to it. And one of them, just as we were talking about when we were talking about regulation and kind of the one size fits all being a problem and opening up a gap for something else to exploit, is that scale can make it very hard to do the niche, to do kind of true authentic localization, to really segment your audience and deliver something that's just right for that tiny niche. And scale also therefore tends to, as well as kind of lacking nuance of design, it tends to eventually reduce choice. Arguably, I think that's inevitable. We've had a very overcrowded content market for a long time, but we see no lack of small suppliers starting up or spinning out of operators and other suppliers. And I don't think they're all deluded or stupid. Perhaps many of us are too optimistic, otherwise we wouldn't dare be entrepreneurs. But, I think those spin-ups are often because they spot a niche that they can colonize much better than operators working or suppliers at huge scale.
And customers also like things that are new, don't they? Especially if they're not innovative or innovative. We add around sort of 80 companies to our database each year, probably 80 to 100, something along those lines. You're getting, probably on average a studio or two launching every month virtually. It is tremendous the amount of new content and new studios that are coming out there. But so you've got lots of content, got lots of studios, but you've also got lots of consolidation, and I can't help but think that consolidation will continue.
I think it will too, and I think one of the trends that you're already seeing is a focus on publishers. So a lot of larger studios becoming publishers now and sort of getting smaller studios to set up on them and taking a rake off their revenue share, which of course arguably is what aggregators and platforms did for a long time without perhaps providing the same tools that the publishers were doing. But you know, that is that's a tight margin business for all concerned.
I mean, the advantage of that model as well is the regulatory aspect of it is taken away from those smaller studios too, isn't it? You know, we were just talking about that earlier. You know, it's you know, the publishing model is very regulatory friendly for the small studio, isn't it? Or compliance friendly, let's say.
Yes, compliance friendly and to some extent technology and distribution friendly. I mean, those are the tools that you are essentially paying for as a small studio, if that's the route you go down. But you know, look, you only have to ask anyone in video gaming or any writer for that matter, and you don't find, you know, it's very few writers who become a breakout success, and it's very few video game companies that become the big hit on Steam. Steam, the company, does much better, just as the publisher has traditionally done much better than the individual writer. And I think we will see exactly the same outcome happening in slots publishing, let's call it. As someone who worked in the publishing industry for quite a long time,
do you see? I mean, we've looked at sort of how the big boys who've, you know, gobbled up, you know, Pac-Man style all these you know, smaller studios and so on. We've looked at how they've actually gone on to consolidate them or not over time. You know, are those brands still alive as markets, sort of studio brands? Are the sites still alive? You know, what was the purpose of buying them up in the first place, and was it to have sort of lots of, you know, a family of niche companies to try and cover what your issue there of the fact that, you know, big is cumbersome effectively. You know, do you think there is, you know, it is at all possible for big companies to remain agile, to keep that small company spirit alive of the acquisition targets that they've purchased?
I mean, it depends on what they're doing the acquisition for. So actually to keep a niche studio that does something expert in a particular area, that's a pretty rare acquisition reason in my experience. I think acquihire, remove competition, grab some particular piece of technology or distribution or expertise that you plan to bring into the company as a whole, I think are more normal reasons. But you have to remember that in the world, in all industry generally, something like 50% of mergers and acquisitions don't create value. And some astonishing number like a third actually destroy value. And I think the gambling and the iGaming industry is in a delighted, oh, it's all wonderful, let's just go buy people and it's going to be great. And I think a lot of the disappointment and the hangover of how those deals do not work out is still to hit. Miserable pessimism and sour grapes from someone who has not been just handed a very large check.
So you guys up for sale?
Are you buying, Kevin? Are you?
I'm broke, sorry.
But I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. I certainly think it's an uncomfortable time to think you can coast along as a small or medium supplier doing what you've done. And I don't think many are that deluded. I think all of them are looking for what they believe their edge, their niche, or their breakout opportunity is.
I mean, we see a good correlation ourselves sort of between the distribution of content out there across thousands of operators and the number of aggregator stroke publisher partners companies have. And I definitely think the more there is a push towards consolidation, the more compliance issues come on board, or complexities, let's say, the more that sort of indirect route will be pervasive. Really, I think that the days of studios, especially sort of medium-sized ones, let's say, of actually sort of hooking up directly with operators are not limited, but they're going to be on the wane, let's say.
Yes, although I mean, I know that makes sense. Although I would just say I have noticed in the past couple of, in the last year, I've actually noticed some pushback against that. And there are several operators who have suddenly started doing direct integrations again as a way of getting that extra tiny bit of margin that they clearly feel they need. So once again, as soon as things start to go one way, it opens up a little gap for a few people to dash through doing it differently.
How hard is it getting on a roadmap these days, on an operator's roadmap?
Well, it's also a lot easier than it was. 5 years ago, no one had heard of G and had no idea what we did. So it's actually much easier to get on a roadmap nowadays. But, it's one of the eternal struggles for every supplier is how do you build your distribution network so that it is both a manageable overhead, but also to give you the broadest distribution possible, while equally balancing that need to be, is it better to be a very big fish in a small pond versus, no one makes any money from being position number 400 on the slots page. Once you're down there, to some extent, don't bother. So is it better to have 3 or 4 customers where you're position 1 and 2? And I see that tension continually playing out in the strategic choices that our competitors and we are making.
Interesting. No, I mean, we also hear sort of stories of people, of size having that other advantage of allowing you to sort of sew things up. So you have all these sort of conflicting sort of dynamics, as you say, where companies are saying, well, I wish I could get my new live game content, for example, onto operator A, B, or C, but someone a little bit bigger than us has been there before, and they've sewn it up with a multi-year deal, and you hear things like that, and you go, as good as your innovation may be, not segueing into anything else, of course, as good as your innovation may be, there are those constraints, imposed.
Well,
that's consolidation.
Let me be clear. I think that one of the major issues facing slot producers now, whether they choose to acknowledge this or not, is that we are creating a commodity product. And when you have a commodity product, there are only a couple of ways out of it, really. You either have to really embrace segmentation and understand how you are producing products that are perfect for different segments of your market and price according to that segmentation, or you have to be able to deliver some kind of breakout innovation in some other way. And again, I've worked in retail where you're, look at something as commoditized as plain flour. Well, when you're in a supermarket today, you can buy plain flour that's better for bread, or that's stone ground, or that's a value range, or that's a value range that doesn't look like a value range, or that's
the vomiting range as well.
So segmentation is a really effective method of working. And I don't believe that slots have yet truly embraced segmentation of customer type, of player type. They may think that they're doing particular feature segmentation or theme segmentation, but that's not segmenting your market, because that's not looking at your player base, and it doesn't permit any kind of price differential, which is the crucial element of it.